Okay, so one of the things that you guys should be familiar with first is this question of civilizations and what were the most important characteristics of the civilizations of Mesopotamia. These characteristics will be true of all fertile civilizations that begin in all across the world. So make sure that it's not simply just one country, or rather one civilization, but most civilizations will begin roughly the same way. Again, what were the most important characteristics of the village of Mesopotamia? Now, I trust that most people are already familiar roughly with the village of Mesopotamia, or at least the ideas and civilization of Mesopotamia to some degree. Cool. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail about any of these. Go ahead.
Are we answering them?
Yeah, I mean, are you familiar with the characteristics of Mesopotamia?
It was by the water.
It was definitely by the water, so that is a key characteristic. You have to be by water, but not just any water. I mean, you could be by the Atlantic Ocean, but you don't have these civilizations being by rivers, and roughly you're by rivers that deposit a lot of silt, soil, fertile land, that kind of thing. Really, the other term that we like to talk about are river valley civilizations. It's not simply just rivers or a civilization, but rather river valley civilizations here. The process is thus. Really, you have people that are hunter-gatherers, nomadic people from across the world, traveling, hunting their foods. The problem is that's not very efficient. You know, your food might run away, you expend a lot of time trying to chase it, and you're constantly on the move. I mean, the environment's still changing at this time. And so these hunter-gatherers do pretty well inventing tools, they do master fire, all those great things, but they don't really settle down until you start seeing the development of villages. Now, this is still not civilization, this is just basic villages. But the reason why they settled down is they wanted to farm. And the reason why they wanted to farm is that they had a more controlled source of food. You know where it's going to be, you can rely on it, things are great. Now, the argument I made earlier is that one of the major reasons why we began farming is that people liked to get drunk. They realized that fermenting wheat, barley, rye can lead to alcohol. Now, while that may not be the primary reason, there is a historical field now looking into the impact of alcohol on the development of civilization. Once you start domesticating animals, you start having a lot of food. And if you are the one village that has a lot of food, the other groups will want to have your food as well. And so, in order to make sure that your food was protected, you began to build walls. Hence, you see the rise of civilizations. You build the walls to protect your food. But also, more importantly, the reason why you're building your walls, your civilizations, is that you don't really know why your food is growing. You don't really know why you're successful. So, and some years you're not successful. Some years the river doesn't work. So because you don't have the science to explain this, you naturally assume that the reason why the river ebbs and flows is because of who? The gods. Maybe a god, maybe multiple gods. Polytheism, monotheism, they're all kind of existent at this time. If the gods are responsible, then the only way to appease the gods is to spend the rest of your civilization's lifetime developing structures to them, rituals, temples. And so you start developing these complex institutions because you believe this is the only way to get food the next year. And if you don't get food the next year, you clearly had done something wrong, and it has nothing to do with the fact that there was more rain up in Greece or whatever, because you don't have science yet. Everyone good so far?
This will be online, right?
This will all be online. Yeah. So again, it's up to you to decide what kind of notes you want to take. If you guys just want to listen, that's cool with me as well. So it's all kind of what you want to take in. But you should be familiar with this idea of nomadic shifting into farming, becoming civilizations. That is the key thing you guys should be familiar with. These are the 4 river valley civilizations that begin at this time. You should be familiar with this group. What is this river valley? The Nile River Valley. So you have the Nile River. That's the first group. The first, however, is Mesopotamia here. That is seated at the heart of the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. So you should know the 2 river system, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Now, one key thing, folks, is that in the future, when you guys do enter the classroom, laptops and whiteboards are great and all. I don't like using whiteboards. The major reason why is if I'm lecturing to you and I want to write Tigris and Euphrates on the board, I have to do this. And while I trust most of my students, it's not an issue of me not trusting them. The second you turn around, you lose that connection. But if I'm writing on a computer, I'm constantly maintaining eye contact. We are still having a conversation, even when I'm writing, and you're interacting with the text, you're interacting with images. A tablet computer is your best friend, in my opinion, especially in history, even if you're doing math, because then you can annotate. If you're looking at political cartoons, look at what that guy's doing, and you know all the things that you can do with a tablet PC. I don't recommend, you know, those iPads or whatever else because they're not as powerful, but a tablet PC is your best friend. And if you ever want recommendations, I just got this one. It replaced my old one yesterday. I still have that one, so if ever you guys are interested in getting that one for cheap, I still have it on the side. I upgraded to this one yesterday. But they're awesome, and they're really great in teaching U.S. history. You can have your kids kind of annotate things, and so it's really just an interactive experience.
How does it connect?
You mean in terms of...
To the...
I mean, it's a basic projector.
Oh, okay.
But there are wireless projectors you can purchase also, so if you want to walk around with it, you can. I mean, if I bought a battery for this one, it's an 11-hour battery, a secondary, so you can actually walk around with your laptop all day.
Just project on the wall.
Yeah, exactly. So it's something that you can do. So it's an awesome tool. So wireless projector might be something you can do. We don't have the funds at our school for it because we already have a projector. But if you want a secondary projector that's wireless, that is something, I mean, that's my dream, but I would have to buy it out of my own pocket, which I'm like, forget it. I'm good with the one we have. Anyway, so you have that as the first civilization, Mesopotamia. And then, of course, you have the Indus Valley. This is the Indus Valley. We'll talk about them later. And then here you have the, what is it called? I want to say Yellow River Valley, but I think it's the Yangtze River. Yeah, I think it's the Yangtze River Valley. Yangtze River Valley. But those are the four. You should know the four. You should know where they are. And as you notice, all four civilizations revolved around rivers. Not oceans, not creeks, not anything but rivers. And the reason why, folks, is that these are controllable bodies of water and they deposited silt for fertile farmlands. That's really what it came down to. And so here is the Fertile Crescent. This is also refers to Mesopotamia, which is what Mesopotamia means, the Fertile Crescent. And this is where the first civilization emerged because they could grow foods. It was very fertile. It was a great place to be able to develop civilization. It began here in Sumerian Empire, and as the empire expanded, it became this entire Fertile Crescent hither. So you should be familiar with the Sumerian Empire eventually becoming the Mesopotamian Empire. In books, you'll read about how it went from Sumerian to Akkadian to Mesopotamian. That doesn't matter. For your purposes, it doesn't matter. Sumerian, Mesopotamian, you're good. You should know that. And as you notice, we're not talking about really key figures here. There will be one guy you need to know in just a second, but you don't have to know like all the dynasties and whatever else. I'm going to just get rid of this. Again, Cradle of Civilization, Fertile Crescent, all that stuff, blah, blah, blah. Again, it's that flooding once per year that really does lead to fertile soil. So again, it's the idea of fertile soil, the idea of being able to, create that Fertile Crescent, that farming civilization. Again, we talked about before, because they're doing so well in Sumeria, they're going to be constantly attacked by all the other people that want their foods. Hence, you develop walls, you develop temples, you develop a civilization to protect, because otherwise they're going to keep stealing your foods. So this is why farming led to civilization. It's because of this greediness of mankind to say, I want what's theirs. So what did these Sumerian city-states have in Mesopotamia? Well, they had what became known as a ziggurat. One, you had high walls, so that was civilization, but also you had ziggurats. And a ziggurat was a temple to the gods. If the river flowed, it's because you prayed correctly. If the river didn't flow, it's because you didn't do it right, or you angered the gods because you did it wrong. Of these, Ziggurat is the one you guys have to know, and we'll go into more detail. But this right here, that's a ziggurat. And as you notice, it is the largest building in the entire city, which goes to show how important religion was to these communities. It was the center of everything, because the largest building they create is not for the king, it's to the gods. Now, fun fact though, they did use a ziggurat to store their food as well, but the major reason they had a ziggurat was to pray to the gods. It was secondary that it was the most reinforceable building, so they stored their food there as well.
And then it's later seen in Latin American culture.
Yes, but it's not because of them.
Right.
Yes,
but the same shape.
Yes. I mean, they argue that it's just mankind just decided that was the best ideal shape to make pyramids and whatever else at the time. Again, you do have specialized workers, but again, this is not something you do really have to know. But again, you do have tiered classes. In every civilization, you start seeing tiered classes. You have the upper wealthy nobility that are there because God said so. You have the merchant classes because you need an economy. And then if you go force, you have serfs and slaves because who's going to make the food, who's going to do the manual labor. So civilizations, this is where you see specialized work. Hunter-gathering, you kind of have specialized work, but there's only hunting and gathering. Here, you have leadership, the religious leaders. I wouldn't really worry too much about complex institutions because it does get complex, but you should know that they were polytheistic. They did have multiple religions. Don't worry about that so much. 10 Commandments, blah, blah, blah. By the way, you should know the 10 Commandments and the Torah, but we'll get to that later. The government, you should be familiar with King Hammurabi. This is the guy you need to know. Because he was the guy who wrote the Code of Hammurabi, which is the first set of written laws. And the Code of Hammurabi, again, had 282 basic laws, which is basically an eye for an eye. If you poke out my eye, the punishment is to poke out your eye. If you were an architect and you built my house and it crushed me, then your punishment is you will be killed. If my son got killed in that house crashing, then I get to kill your son. If, however, you killed my slave, you have to pay me for the slave. I don't get to kill your slave because slaves are property, even back then. But again, the key thing about Hammurabi's code is that it's the first legal system that also laid out punishments for crime. So that's really the significance of Hammurabi's code. Key examples of Hammurabi's code: if a man has stolen an ox, a sheep, a pig, or a boat that belonged to a temple or a palace, he shall repay 30 times its cost. If it belonged to a private citizen, he shall repay 10 times. If the thief cannot pay, he shall be put to death. Yeah.
What language was it written?
Cuneiform. You'll see an example of it in just a second. But really what it comes down to is you can see that the religion was much more important than the private citizen. 30 times if it's a religious pig versus a private pig. Here's also the role of women. If a woman hates her husband and says to him, "You cannot be with me," the authorities in her district will investigate the case. If she has been chaste and without fault, even though her husband has neglected or belittled her, she will be held innocent and may return to her father's house. If the woman is at fault, she will be thrown into the river. So, if the husband is at fault, you're allowed to leave. No punishment for the husband. But if you're at fault, you're going to be thrown into the river. So, not equal.
Were they thrown in the river to die?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. For death. Because you weren't faithful to your husband. And you're a woman, is the argument. So you're not equal to men. If the woman is not, if a man put out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out. If he puts out the eye of the freedman or breaks the bone of a freeman, he shall pay 1 gold mina. If he puts out the eye of a man slave or breaks the bone of a man slave, he shall pay half of its value. So again, slaves are half.
But then again, with Code 198, if it's a slave that does it, he gets put to death, doesn't he?
Yeah. And again, so, and we're not talking about like African slaves, we're just talking about slaves in general.
Yeah.
So it's just like whoever they captured at the time.
Right.
Yep. Here's how it was written. So, cuneiform. And if you notice, they're all very pointy, so it shows kind of what they were writing with at the time. Sticks. It's basic sticks. You have pointy ends and you have round ends, and that's writing at the time.
Well, and you see this discussion about Hammurabi's code on the U.S. part as well.
Yes, because we said, oh, we like how they had written system. So
we based ours off of the legal.
The
that's
idea
where all the legal systems came
of
from.
all the worlds.
Yeah, the
inspired
idea
by Hammurabi's
of
code.
justice versus punishment, you know. So you'll see it again on the U.S. part of the test.
Yes, you will. Sumerians made the first world's first writing system called cuneiform. You should know that one. Phoenicians took it. So the Phoenicians took cuneiform and said, you know what, this is way too complicated. It's too pictorial. Let's make it phonetic. Hence Phoenicians. The Phoenician merchants spread the alphabet around the world, and they influenced the alphabet. So Phoenicians gave us the alphabet. In case you guys are curious, bam. There's a Phoenician alphabet, and you will notice that our alphabet comes from that. Thanks, Phoenicians, for the alphabet.
Well, they have like a radio, like a presenter voice.
I do get that a lot. But that's kind of how that all works. Cool. Technology, folks, you got wheels, sails, but the most important is the plow and bronze metalwork. If you need to know any of these, it's the plow. Pretty much advanced farming techniques is what you have to know. These PowerPoints are great if you're teaching an actual ancient civilization class. There's a lot of information here that you don't necessarily have to know, but I pulled these off of when I was teaching this course, so there's some things that you just don't have to know. Yeah.
Did you make these slides or?
Yeah, I made a lot of these myself. Again, part of it is that there are PowerPoints there out there already, so take them and make them your own. So did I take all these pictures on my own? No, I mean, I obviously Google searched the crap out of everything. But once you find what you want, every year I tweak it just a little bit. Again, I just did a World War I lecture in my classroom, and here's a tip, guys. Pinterest is awesome when teaching U.S. history, because you can Google World War I propaganda on Pinterest, and someone's done all the work for you already, because they're hobbyists.
Right.
And I didn't realize this till, what, a week ago, and I'm like, wow, I really wish I had done that before. But no, it's great. And so let's say you're looking for political cartoons of the 1930s, put that on a Pinterest, and someone has done some work, and if they haven't, contribute to that work. And so I highly recommend Pinterest as a tool for teachers is really great. I highly recommend it contributing to the community. I'm going to start doing that this year. Yeah, it's not just for like, my fiance who's looking at wedding stuff also. It's great for teachers now. And so I'm going to start advocating Pinterest for teachers, because I just realized recently it's a great tool. It's a great tool for your students also. If you want them to do a project, have them do a Pinterest project.
Yeah.
It'll be great for them. I have more PowerPoint slides, but that's the first one. Let's move on to the second one. This is a little bit more detail here. Sure. So again, pick up whatever else you need to online. We talk about Mesopotamia, Egypt, Harappa, or the Indus Valley. Ah, that's the name I was looking for. Not the Yangtze. Yangtze is not wrong. Huang He. It's the same.
Yeah,
it's like the It's like Peking. Beijing is not Peking. The Americans called it Peking.
Right.
So it's not wrong. It's just.
Well, that's like Ho Chi Minh City.
Yeah.
Used to be Saigon. Yeah.
Exactly. So again, you have the 4 separate civilizations. Just be sure that you guys are aware. Harappa is the other name of the Indus Valley. We're going to get into more detail about.
You just covered Mesopotamia.
Yes, we're going to go into a little bit more detail, but not too much. I have the 2, and I kind of just overlap them. We'll go over these 4 right now. Actually, before we do you guys want to take a quick break? Like a 15, 10-minute, just kind of do that real quick? You guys want to? Yeah, let's do that real quick. Let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back to this in just a second.
Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, they ask all sorts of questions. So I tell them, as long as.
All right. So Mesopotamia, we already covered most of this stuff, so you guys should be good. Tigris and Euphrates, very fertile, no natural barriers, so eventually they do get eliminated. There's Sumeria, we know this stuff already. Blah, 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 blah. Ah, here's what you should know. It is the first city-state. It's the first city-state. City-states are cities that are also independent countries, roughly. Greece had city-states, that kind of thing. It's kind of the precursor to the full state where you had enough organization to govern a large mass of territory.
So
going back to how they got eliminated was because they had no natural barriers.
Yeah.
So, like, meaning, like, you know, like...
Pretty much, if you look at the map, here it goes. Look at the map. It's just rivers, and they were around the rivers, and so short of having walls, there was no mountains in their way. There was no deserts preventing people from attacking them. They were in the most ideal situation to have a civilization, but everyone could get there. That was the problem. So it's like if you want to build a fort here on the Claremont colleges, don't build it at like Harvey Mudd, because Harvey Mudd is pretty open, you know, whereas you should build it at Scripps because they have like a fortress. So that's the basic idea. Blah, blah, blah here. Don't need to... Here's a ziggurat. As you can see, it is a temple design, and it's supposed to be for the gods. The main focus of the Mesopotamian civilization is religion. So that is the key focus. The ziggurats were the largest temple because religion dictated everything. If you were going to survive, drink, eat that day, religion dictated that.
What are the land masses? This ties into the agriculture where they were building on hills, but it was like steps into a platform type thing. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where like they had the lower level and then there was, and it was mountain, but it was like steps of the mountain up.
In this region?
No, I want to say it was Latin America.
You're talking about the Incans and then the Philippines. The step terraces were literally carved mountains, but man did that. They took a mountain and they carved into it. So the
But
step
then they
terraces.
did their agriculture.
We'll talk about that. We'll get to that. We'll talk about the step
Because
terraces.
Honestly, the question that was asking us about steps, that was what when I saw the word, that was instantly what I associated with. So then I was like, and then.
We'll talk about step terraces versus just a step.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Again, ziggurats, Tower of Babel. They say, Tower of Babel, that tall tower, they assume that that's what they were talking about in the Bible, is a ziggurat. Because it was this tall tower reaching to God. It must have been a ziggurat at the time. Yep. Interesting enough. It lasted, it was eliminated, all that stuff. Don't worry about it. Religion was really important. We talked about that already. It was a theocracy, class systems, don't worry about that. Cuneiform, we got into it. Cuneiform is what we should talk about real quickly. Why was it used? Cuneiform is primarily for economics. It's how do you trade? How many horses did you buy? Well, you draw 10 horses, and that's how many horses that you bought that day. It's made on clay, and then you bake it. And then that's how you know it's a receipt that you record forever. Also, it's one of the first uses to record beer recipe, which again goes to the argument civilization was created because of beer.
So if they didn't have the knowledge of pottery, they didn't have the knowledge of
writing.
how to maintain the writing on the cuneiform.
Yeah. So again, remember, they developed a lot of the stuff before the writing system. They already developed walls, and so they had to figure out how do we develop our trade system and make it accurate. And we're like, well, actually, you can write in clay, and if you burn it, it stays. Because they're already decorating pottery by this time.
Right, right.
And so once you realize that you can also record, hey, you drew animals there. I wonder if we could use that as an economic system. They did. Again, fish. Here's how they drew fish, ox, and birds. So you do see the development of cuneiform, which is a pictogram from time to time.
And does it mean anything if you draw it sideways or?
That's just the way it was. I mean, they drew sideways, and then eventually it just kind of tilted itself. Yeah. And there it is.
iPad.
Yes, it's great. It's and again, imagine having to lug that around. It's like, what'd you buy? Let me go check my files. And you just have massive amounts of just clay bricks.
They had an amazing display at the Discovery Center across from our campus, or not the Discovery Center, the California
Science Center?
Yeah, Science Center. All of the technological advancements that the Arabs had before
Everyone else?
and I didn't, some of it, even teaching it, I had no idea how much they had really discovered before.
They were far and away far more advanced in Europe, and the Crusades destroyed so much, as did the Arab, what do you call them? Who destroyed the Library of Alexandria? The Arabs. Yeah. So they destroyed. So like they're far and away. They had so much stuff, and then we destroyed it all.
Yeah, it was
Sucks.
astounding to see it. Like I was just walking through a course, and the kids were like, "Let's go." I'm like, "You don't understand what you're learning right now," But it just.
Yep. Writing was for the wealthy classes, so most people did not know how to write, obviously, because it's an economic form. But again, only the most educated could afford to learn how to write. Here he is, showing curse words to his boss. There, he's like tagging on his cuneiform tablet there. You should also know the story of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is a famous story of Mesopotamia. And the story of Gilgamesh was that he was a man god. He was half man, rather 1/3 man, 2/3 god. And the story of Gilgamesh is that he wanted to live forever. But what he realized was that he was still a man, and thus he must die like every other man. He learned humility as a man.
Name my kid.
It's a great story, though.
Name my son.
I tell my students all the time whenever there's like a crazy name, like, here's who did I come, like, Humphrey Gilbert. I'm gonna name my daughter Humphrey. The kids are like, why? I'm like, because it's an awesome name. And,
Nobody else will have
I want to be different. Yeah, exactly.
You see, he's humble, right?
Yeah. But Gilgamesh, the story who wants to seek out eternal youth and then realizes that because he's part man, he must die as well.
How did this influence? Oh, good grief! I just lost it. The Odyssey later on. 'Cause, to me, it seems even though they're different in
Mhm.
what it says, kind of the bottom baseline of it is very.
I think the archetypes are there. I think
Right.
what it comes down to is this idea of humility and how man cannot exceed the prowess of man. Man has
Right.
limitations. But also, I mean, it's a story that you had this epic poetry that becomes
Right.
story is really, the structure influences Greek stories
Right.
as well. Don't worry about trade and whatever else. You don't worry about that so much. I do like the fact that they invented quadratic equations, so I think that's pretty awesome. B squared plus or minus the square root of 4ac over 2a.
History teachers are not math teachers.
Well, I'm not. I mean, when I do math with my kids, like, oh, obviously 12% of the population, 2,300. Let's pretend I said 10%, and then I'll just do that. So, I mean, I'm very aware that since I was pretty good at math way back when, but I don't do very much math at all anymore, and so I just I screw things up all the time in class. But the best thing when you're teaching guys is to show humility and transparency. Joke with your kids, accept your failures, accept your strengths also, and just be honest about them. You know, it's always great. If you're honest with your kids, then they'll appreciate it. Yeah, it goes a long way.
Oh no, my mother was like, you should teach math. You do not want me teaching you math. Trust me, you will leave her 10 times more confused.
Code of Hammurabi, you guys should know already. Not too worried about that. Neo-Babylon, don't worry about that as well. Don't worry about them. Or that. Here's some questions. What was the world's first writing system? Here's what we're going to... Whoa. I'm going to take volunteers here.
Oh.
Lydia, what was the first writing system?
I don't know how to
Cuneiform. Good. What was it developed for? Let's go with... go.
To make receipts and economic purposes.
There you go.
And beer. Yeah.
And beer. Who were literate in Mesopotamia? Gerald.
The literacy was reserved for the wealthy classes.
Exactly, because they were the merchants, the businessmen, whatever else. You see why this tool is awesome? Because
why?
you...
I forgot the why.
But the why is because they're merchants. Now, the reason why this tool is amazing is because you will ask questions and your kids who always answer will always answer. So how do you get kids? I used to have to use popsicle sticks, and I never used them. I would make them, and it was just like, just pick them out. I hate using equity sticks. You guys might use flashcards or whatever else. You can download programs that will do this for you automatically. It comes with the software, with the remotes, so it's amazing. Again, the remotes, I can't say enough about them. They make your life easier. But it forces your kids to participate, and you can say, well, what about you? And then you can go back and whatever else, and you just go again and again and again. It makes sure. When you're teaching guys, you want to make sure you're always calling on different kinds of kids. You can cheat also, though, and just choose kids in particular that you want to choose also. Also, if someone doesn't know the answer to a question, say, okay, if you don't know, I'm going to ask someone else. Can someone help them out? Okay, let's say, say you just say, oh, was the lower class? Actually, no. Can someone help Gerald out? Oh, yes, it's a cat. It is the wealthy. Gerald, what was the answer? It's the wealthy. So you never let a kid answer the question wrong. If they do, you always go back. You never let them sit down and say, I got it wrong, and that's it. You make sure they say it right at least once by the end of that day. You always correct.
Is it a stretch? Sorry.
Hmm,
Is it
go
a
ahead.
stretch that this resembles our form of government
Mhm.
a lot? Is it a stretch that it was like the original capitalist society?
Yeah, actually it is. I mean, I mean, civilization, for the most part, unregulated, is purely capitalist because mankind is inherently greedy. So, I mean, that's just the way we are. And so America today is not so much this way because we've adopted socialist practices, progressive era, New Deal. We feel that we can't just say survival of the fittest. It has to be help your fellow man. But at the root, we're still animals, and animals believe in the concept of survival of the fittest. I am successful because I'm stronger than you, therefore, too bad if you're not as good. What was the first piece of literature, and what was it about? Let's go with, Elizabeth's not here, so Jarrell.
Was it Gilgamesh?
Gilgamesh, and what did he want?
He wanted immortality.
There you go.
And he was half man and half god, but because he realized that he was a man in his nature, he had to die.
Yep, that's good. Actually, he was 2/3 god and 1/3 man.
2/3.
But I mean, they don't care.
Okay.
Basic political unit of Mesopotamia is the city-state. Don't worry about that so much. And what was the focal point of Mesopotamian city-state? What was the most important thing in the city-state?
The big.
Ziggurat.
Ziggurat. The
Ziggurat.
Ziggurat is the focal point of Mesopotamia. Religion is the foundation of Mesopotamia. It dictated everything. How did geography affect the development of Mesopotamian religion? I'll take a volunteer. How does geography affect their
Well, because
religion?
the rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates overflowed and gave them fertile soil, so then they were able to build their civilization. However, it was also their demise because there was nothing protecting them, so people were able to come in and wipe them out eventually.
Correct, but that's not
So,
answering the question
Okay, affect the development.
of.
The Mesopotamian. Oh, religion. I thought
Ah.
it's the region.
So you were right so far, but how might that affect
The
religion?
religion.
So I'm gonna go with the Gerald here.
I will take your response on the rivers,
Uh-huh.
but if the river didn't flow correctly, or if it flowed regularly, that was used to either pray more or say that the gods were on their side, and that's why they developed the Ziggurat
Mhm.
and emphasized it.
Good. How did geography affect the development of Mesopotamian civilization? Ultimately, we didn't talk about this too much, but it's just because of the fertile soil, they could expand even further. At the same time, it does lead to their demise, as you
Yeah, I
said
answered
before.
that one. I
You
was
did.
anticipating the next
You
question.
did. Well done. First Empire, Sumerians. What was the Code of Hammurabi? Written laws, that kind of thing. Who laid the foundations of our alphabet?
What was it based on, though?
The
Do you mean, well, yeah, do you mean an eye for an eye, or do you mean based on as in there was something,
eye for an eye.
okay,
Yeah.
preceding it? Do you know what
Yeah,
I mean? 'Cause
just basic punishments, laws, whatever else.
Okay.
Yeah. And who laid the foundations for our modern alphabet? Phoenicians. Very good. Cool. So the basic characteristics of the Tigris Euphrates civilization is they had democracy, large durable empires, village-level governments, regional city-states, and hunting bands for a while. So good times for everyone. Egypt begins in the Nile River Valley. You should be familiar that there are two parts of Egypt, northern Egypt and southern Egypt, or the northern Nile River and the southern Nile River.
Okay.
Yeah.
This might sound just ignorant. What was Egypt? Is this what transformed? Was Mesopotamia what transformed to Egypt? Is
No.
another-
That-
just-
you assume that these are all happening on parallel.
Oh.
They're all
okay.
different times.
Yeah, they're all roughly at about the same time, but Mesopotamia was first.
Okay.
And,
So what's current day Mesopotamia?
huh?
Current day Mesopotamia.
What is current day Mesopotamia?
Yeah.
Iraq.
Okay.
Iraq. Iraq is Mesopotamia. Yes, they have. And so, did Mesopotamia influence the Nile River Valley? Yes. But the Nile River Valley was already developing at that time because they had the exact same circumstances. When we look at those four river valleys that we looked at originally on the map, they all have similar circumstances. Fertile soil, surrounded by rivers. Some are more successful than others.
Parallel, okay.
Exactly. So we talked about how the Mesopotamia did not succeed because it didn't have those natural barriers. Egypt will be a bit different. Because they were surrounded by desert, which we called the Red Land, and these are a natural barrier to invasion. If you're going to invade Egypt, you got to get across the Sahara and some of the other deserts, so that's not so good for others, so it actually works out for Egypt, and they don't get attacked very often. They do benefit from the Nile River, which does ebb and flow, and they're called the Black Lands because of all the fertile soil and the silt, so it actually is very fertile. And unlike Mesopotamia, where, again, they had to pray a lot more because it was coming and going, the rivers, the Nile River was actually pretty consistent. It was actually pretty good to go. When it does go out, it's like, holy crap, what's going on? But for the most part, it was a very stable river valley system. The river was everything for the Egyptians. Their form of communication, their life, their religion, communication, trade. The river was everything for them because it connected them to the rest of the world.
Mesopotamia was the Tigris and the
Euphrates, correct. Whereas the Nile River Valley is the Nile River. So how did geography influence Egypt's religion? It's the exact same answer. Ebbing and flowing of the river. Osiris, thank you. If not, it's Amun-Ra's fault and whatever else. Yeah, that going on.
What's current day Euphrates and Tigris?
Yeah, they still call them the same thing. It's just still in Iraq, but they're still there. Okay. There was Upper and Lower Egypt that was unified by King Menes, and you had the establishment of the pharaoh. So the reason why they were separated is simply because of cataracts or waterfalls, because the river would drop pretty substantially. And so for a time, even though they were the same peoples, they were roughly separated until they were combined by King Menes in the Archaic period. And you see the emergence of pharaohs for the first time. If you believe in the mythology of Stargate, however, the Egyptians were created by aliens. So there's that.
Some lots of beliefs out there.
Don't worry about that so much. Fun fact, guys, the pyramids were not really built by slaves. They were built by regular Egyptians that were paid to work. And the pyramids were designed. Most of them were built during the Old Kingdom. Here they are. And they were built as tombs for the kings. So again, most people know that already, but you will likely be asked, that's what the pyramids were for. Also, fun fact, they were smooth and they were white. And so they actually reflected. And also, the king never saw the pyramid completed in their lifetime because it took like forever. So you were dead, and then once it was completed, then they would bury you in it like 50 years after you were dead.
So where were you, chilling at home?
You were just at a temporary tomb until they finished it, and then they finished it, and threw you in there, and that was it.
Bombed, you know, they could just, I don't want to say leave you out, but it wasn't the necessity to bury you.
Yeah,
dead
because
you were already bombed.
Yeah, and you were supposed to get buried there, but the problem is that when you die, I mean, they started construction of your pyramid.
When you were appointed.
Yeah, once you were appointed, but likely it wouldn't be done until you were far dead already. So they buried you posthumously.
Was jagged size or after time or war?
After time. Just after time. I mean, really when it comes, yeah, the sandstorms, it just really just wipes away at it. They're very bright and shiny. Again, the pyramids were designed not by slave labor, but by the Egyptian people. People always wonder how was it done. It's not by aliens, but rather we did try to recreate it, and it was done with wooden slats and a lot of hard labor. So it's impressive, to say the least. It's impressive what they were able to do. Don't worry about this so much. Old Kingdom versus New Kingdom is not too important. Don't worry about the Nubians either. We'll get to them later. Don't even worry about the Hyksos or the chariots or any of that stuff. You should know Hatshepsut, though. Hatshepsut was the first of 4 female rulers. She was succeeded by her son, who erased all records of her because he was not happy with the fact that there was a female ruler, and she did not really have a good relationship with her son. He felt at the time that she had usurped his throne when he should have been king as a child, and her not being too happy about that, said, "You were never leader of this world. It was only leader of men."
Did he ever rule?
Huh?
Did her son ever rule?
Yeah, I mean, her son followed, and what happened was that when he became the next pharaoh, he said that you never existed.
Yeah, Tutmos was her son, right?
Yep. Yep.
Oh, that's right. King Tut? No, that's Tutankhamun.
Yeah, that's Tutankhamun. Yeah, different people. Now, Amenhotep, or Akhenaten, established monotheism, and so there was a belief at the time that we got to get rid of all polytheism in the Nile River Valley, and we got to believe in one, and that doesn't pan out so well, but people are pretty angry because people kind of had their own gods that they prayed to, because just like the Greek gods, The Nile River Valley was all about polytheism at the time. You either paid to Amun-Ra or Atan or Osiris. And so there was some anger at trying to establish monotheism, and there will be a rebellion as a result of this. And then polytheism is restored by King Tut. So the child king that's eventually assassinated.
Body youth.
Hmm?
He looks youthful.
He
He was
does.
young. He was really young when he died.
Yes, it's rumored now that he was probably killed as a plot by a harem of women that assisted in the assassination of King Tut.
It's amazing to see how much they've learned from when I learned about Tutankhamun, where it was like you got very basic facts, and now there's, you know,
Yeah, with all the
stuff
genealogy and the story, it's great.
Right, it's amazing.
So he was killed?
He was killed. He was murdered because they weren't really too happy with his policies, and so the assassination plot was the harem of women that he had kind of surrounded himself with. Many of them were paid to kill him. So he
Well,
was.
and he was really young, and they didn't like that a boy was in
Nope.
charge.
So they bludgeoned him.
So was Ramses.
Ramses the Great is the one who follows.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Ramses the Great is the guy who follows him. Don't worry about the rest of this stuff so much. Don't worry about 3D Kadesh. Here's Ramses, entombed and mummified.
I think though, for how long he's been dead, he looks pretty freaking
That's
young.
he just looks old. That's all it is. In terms of religion, they are polytheistic ultimately. So there is that. Despite the fact of an attempt at monotheism, Egypt for the most part was a polytheistic society. Don't worry about who believed in what. You know, Amun-Ra versus Osiris. How did geography affect the Egyptian civilization?
If the river was good,
True.
you prayed to this god. If the river was bad, you prayed more to this god.
True. Versus vice versa,
Right.
other gods. But also, how did it affect the rise of their civilization? Why didn't they have the same problems as the Mesopotamians?
They flourished more. They flourished more because it was Kanana River.
Yes, that is also true.
They were surrounded by natural barriers.
And they're also surrounded by natural barriers. So all answers are correct. Okay, they had a more consistent river. The river was more consistent, more fertile, and they had natural barriers. Who united Upper and Lower Egypt? King Menes. Who are the three major phases? Don't worry about that so much. In what period were the Great Pyramids constructed? That's the Old Kingdom. Don't worry about that. Most of these. Who was the first female ruler? Hatshepsut. What period? Don't worry about that. No. Don't worry about that. Harappa is the next one. This is the Indus Valley, so don't get confused. Harappan Empire or the Indus Valley Civilization. Harappa. Okay. Well, Harappa was based around the Indus Valley region. They had a lot of trade at this time with Mesopotamia and China. Mesopotamia being, Mesopotamia is here, so it's not that far. And then China would be right about here. Harappa was kind of right in the middle. No, actually, that's Pakistan, India. Pakistan, India. That's where they are right now. And so they had dynamic trade, and they really had a lot of water because of monsoons, which was great. But the monsoons also end up destroying their civilization, so there's give and take, I guess, of what you want, but there they are. Ultimately, they had very advanced sewage systems, so that's always a plus. So, you see this kind of emerging. They needed an advanced sewer system, though. Why? Because of the monsoons. Yes, so where was all that water going to go? They need to develop it, because otherwise their cities would flood. And they did eventually flood, as one of the reasons why they ultimately collapse. You got that going on. We have Harappan writing, but we have no idea what it says.
It makes you wonder though, like sewage systems were already being developed at this point, yet we get to the Middle Ages in Europe and we're still using chamber pots.
Right, lost technology is what it comes down to. And it's
in the Egyptians too, when they were able to make the earliest form of what we would now call a sprinkler system.
And I think what it comes down to is, again, when you look at the Harappan Empire and the Egyptian Empire, water was a key foundation of their civilizations. And the Europeans, it wasn't so much. You had a river every so often, but farming land was there all the time because of rain. And so it's really an issue of, I highly recommend reading Jared Diamonds, Guns, Germs, and Steel, it's really about the environment and how societies evolve, not just because of power, but because if you look at the world, most of the empires of the world emerge from the northern half of the world. And that's not just because they had the trees to create seafaring ships. You know, they had the type of soil, they had iron and bronze, you know, to make warfaring countries. And so what it comes down to is the environment played a huge role in these types of countries. You know, if you live in Africa, you're constantly having to look for resources, so you're not going to become an advanced empire quickly. So Guns, Germs, and Steel is a fantastic book to kind of give you guys some extra information about this. They talk about hemispheres and how germs impacted the world, steel, guns. It's fantastic. But yeah, Harappan writing, have no idea what that means. I assume that's about a cow trying to turn on a lamp, is my guess. But I don't know.
And the reason why we can't decipher is because we haven't found like our roots.
Exactly. There is no text to kind of compare it to. The Rosetta Stone was just amazing. Wow, thank goodness there are 3 types of writing on the same stone. There's no comparison to Harappan writing. It's just lost. It's a lost language.
And how different is current Indian?
Very different.
Very.
Even though the sounds might be similar, the writing system is far and away just a completely different writing system. There are no ancillaries to this.
Right. But look how much more advanced. Well, look how more advanced their pictures and writing is compared to the other regions around Mesopotamia,
Sure.
Egypt. I mean, that's a pretty recognizable cow versus a little triangle
Sure.
sticking out.
I think part of it is what they're working with. I mean, they're working with bronze versus working with clay. You know, so they have a lot more ability, and the other ones are working like poking with sticks.
Right.
And they're also slightly later on developed than the Mesopotamians. So they're not. So they're still around. They're still, what do you call it?
Right.
The same time period, but they developed slightly later.
Right.
So they have the abilities and they have the resources.
Discovering the ability to build up on the bronze and to burn it down enough to create what
Right.
you want out of it smoothly versus stick writing in clay, you know.
Right. Here you have, they're polytheistic, so you have Shiva, they worship the cattle because of afterlife, and when people die, they become cows. Well, why does it decline, though? Because of the ecosystem. It just stops raining as much, the rivers kind of dry out, and the Aryans from Pakistan and the Middle Eastern regions, they kind of come in and they destroy their empire. They drive them out. And so it's similar to what happened to Mesopotamia, except that it included also environmental degradation. They kind of farmed too much. The monsoons weren't as consistent. They just weren't really good at maintaining the region around them, and they kind of overbuilt. And then they kind of just couldn't sustain what they had. So they collapsed.
The other 2 rivers, okay, the Nile River, Tigris and the Euphrates, are they saltwater rivers?
No. They can't be, because if they were, they were so fertile.
Well, that was my question, because yes, they're getting water from the monsoons, but isn't it saltwater?
Not when it comes down.
Okay, but if it came across, because I'm thinking if it blew, cause
If it
like
blows in,
off
yes.
the ocean,
Yes.
So it was like you're getting hit with a wave of seawater.
Right. So so part of it comes down, the water gets washed over, but then as it starts to rain again,
Then it waters. Okay.
exactly. Aryans, noble people. The Vedas is what inspires Hinduism, so the Harappan empires created the Hindu religion, so you should know that. And the Vedas is their book. Here is the caste system, so you should be familiar somewhat with the caste system. The Brahmins, who are the priests, the warriors nobles are I have never known how to pronounce that, Kshatriyas. The Vaishyas, traders and farmers, the Sudras, and they're mostly Dravidian, and of course the Untouchables, the dirty. You may not marry outside of your caste. That's a pretty important rule to have. You stay within your caste, that's your caste, you live there forever, which is kind of messed up. And even today, folks, there are still arguments that we still maintain this caste system still. So it becomes somewhat of a problem.
Well, and they do in the Hindu. How come the Hindu is very heavy on the test, but there's not much about the Punjabi system?
I think it's primarily because it's not a major. Yeah, and so it does develop over time, and it's more of a localized religion that's grown since.
Right.
But it's not. It wasn't around during the Harappan Empire.
But to see how competitive it is between the 2 of them and know how big the differences are, and when you're in India, it's almost fully segregated between the two. It's interesting to see it and then not have it be as important. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I would think if I was teaching it that yes, I want you to know the Hindus, but I want you to also know what has come off of it and stemmed off of it.
And I think you teach that once you start getting into more modern India. You talk about what's arrived since then. When you're talking about and you can definitely talk about ancillary since.
Right.
It kind of depends on how you want to do it. But if you want to show comparisons since then or what's branched out, you can do that at the moment. Or you can always go to modern India and say, remember the time when we talked about this? Here's what happened since. When talking about China, guys, China was isolated because it is surrounded by desert, mountains, oceans, what have you. So China is surrounded for some time. The northern borders were not so much, but it's not because there weren't deserts. The Gobi Desert is still there. China, when it first developed, was very small. And so China was like the middle of what you know as China today. And the other people around them, you wouldn't consider Chinese or like nomadic tribes. So they were, I guess if you look at it today, they were vulnerable to themselves. They weren't a localized group yet. And once that group becomes more unified, then you can say China is on all sides pretty defensible. But there was a Gobi Desert on the west, you had Vietnam in the south, I mean you have arable lands, conservation, all that stuff. But the Hoanghi River is really the major river that kind of develops the Chinese civilization.
They go down and conquer Vietnam for a little bit.
Yep. What did they do in terms of civilization? Well, they did do slash and burn agriculture. Slash and burn agriculture, by the way, is a pretty common form of agriculture for most developing civilizations because you need to destroy everything, and when you burn everything, that creates a great fertilizer in order to be able to grow crops. So slash and burn is actually used by most developing civilizations at the time.
It's still used today.
Mhm.
It's like to break if the forest is getting too heavy and
Yep.
we're at high fire risk.
Mhm.
They'll
They still do that.
Yeah.
And there's an argument, though, that as Latin American countries continue to develop, there's some frustration that as they want to farm even more, they're burning down forests in order to expand their farming economy. They begin domesticating animals, and of course you see silk production. So they begin using silkworms to produce silk. This became one of China's long-held secrets. It was against the law to export silkworms. Also, you really couldn't, even if you tried, because they died on the voyage to Europe. And so this is why China held such a dominance over the silk trade at the time, because they had the silkworms and you couldn't really transport them across the world. Let's see here. The Shang dynasty is fragmented, but they do have a dynasty based on divine rule, so they do have a king of sorts that's in charge. We will spend more time on China next week, or on Saturday, just to give you guys more information about China. They did write on oracle bones, so they did have forms of writing, ideographic symbols, and again, the primary purpose of writing for them was still religious. Again, there are parallels across all of the civilizations. Religion is key. Religion identifies. Religion determines all things, and they find some form of writing. The Phoenicians were able to take the pictographs of cuneiform and turn it into phonetics. The same thing did not happen to the Chinese. The Chinese still maintain a pictographic language today.
They don't have letters, they have pictures.
Yeah, pictures. It's a pictograph.
It's all symbols.
Yep. Because I mean, if you look at the word for man, it's ren, person. I mean, it's a picture. And so it's just one of those things where the pictograms still develop into that today. Bronze is kind of a successful tool that they use. And then what river gave life to the Harappan civilization, guys? No, the Harappan civilization. It's in India, so it's the Indus Valley, Indus River Valley. How would you characterize the Harappan civilization?
Short-lived.
Short-lived, yeah.
Okay.
I would say it collapsed.
Transient.
Yeah, I would say so. It's pretty good. How is the Harappan civilization written language unlike the rest of the floodplain civilizations?
You can't decipher it.
Undecipherable. What happened to the Indus Valley civilization?
Monsoons.
Monsoons destroyed it, as well as the Aryan invasions.
Yeah.
What was the early form of Chinese writing?
Oracle bones.
Oracle bones on pictographs. And what geographic factor most influenced life in Harappa? Monsoons of the rivers, pretty much. What does the word Aryan mean? Noble people, don't worry about that so much. Yeah, don't worry about that. Again, PowerPoint for another class. What is considered the first major Chinese civilization? The Shang. The Shang. Again, we'll talk more about the Chinese later. What major river was Chinese civilization first established? Huanghe. So there you go. Don't worry about the Mekong. That's not something you'll have to know until much later. Yep. And that is that for today.
Can you find these on your website?
Yes. I don't want to go any further here today because it'll take a little bit longer to cover the next section. So my recommendation, again, just to kind of recap everything, is if you are going to buy a book for world history, go buy a coffee table book from Barnes & Nobles. Okay, make sure it has maps. Again, the two books I recommend, let me look at Amazon.com here real quick.
Actually, you should check Barnes & Noble and see if the location close by here has one.
Yeah, actually, we can do that right now.
And I'll stop them.
Let me see, Barnes, it's bn.com, right?
I'm gonna do it on Amazon because used it's like cheaper.
It might be.
Yeah.
It might be. And again, people give them away as Christmas gifts, and then they might be cheap as well. But if there are Barnes & Nobles right now, let's see here. It's Atlas of the World. So I don't know about a lot of these. Oh, the Times. Here's a good one. So it's the Times. That's always good.
It's $100.
Yeah, but that's a hardcover version. But again, if you go to what's it called, Amazon.com, any world atlas will be good. Oh, also, CSET prep course. If you want that book that I was talking about for free, go to APush Digital Ebooks.
Okay.
The password. Let me show you. It'll ask you for a password.
How do you make a website?
I just went to webs.com and I just built one. I mean, there are templates out there you can just make, but I'll show you guys if you want in one of the classes. You go to APush. Oops, what am I doing? There you go. If you go to MrKingLPHS.com again, if you go to APush Digital Ebooks, it's gonna ask for username. The username is LPHS. The password is Go Warriors. It's for my students.
Capitalized?
No, all lowercase.
Okay.
So LPHS Go Warriors. That'll give you guys access. Also, if you really want to study intense U.S. history, the actual AP textbook is here as well online. So this is for you. There are questions in this book, so here's the answer key if you want answers to the questions. And if you want the AP book, it's right here also. This is the actual textbook we use in our classes, so if you want to read an actual AP book to study U.S. history, that's available for you as well. But again, like I said, all the lectures are here for today. I will, wait, that's my AP class. I will redo this website to make it a little bit more sensical because not all of it makes sense anymore because this is from like 2 years ago. But all the work is still the same. So let me update it, but you guys should have access. I will also email you guys today to give you guys an update in terms of Dropbox if you guys want to get the sources there. I have Gerald's email, but I don't have Kat's or Lydia's, so I'm going to have you guys write it on this before you guys leave today. Oh, yeah, before you guys leave also, I have stuff for you. So, the test will require you guys, to be able to analyze documents, so I actually have document samples here for you. We can do a few of these before you guys go today, that way you guys have to conduct this. These are simple, but you guys should know how to do these because you need to be exposed to documents anyway. Also, as teachers, because the United States is moving towards Common Core as a new way to teach, less standardized testing and more teaching students skills, you guys have to be more familiar with skill-based learning. In addition, that's using documents. So we're going to go ahead and read the document that I'm passing out last here. This is not homework. It's just help if you guys want to learn the documents more. Again, these are homework assignments for like 6th graders. It's not hard, but it is designed to kind of introduce you guys to the types of documents you will have to know. So if we go over the first one real quick, kind of read through that, and let's answer those together, and then we'll just do.
What's the first one?
Sorry, this one, the one I just
Okay.
passed out. Go ahead and read document 1 there, and then answer those 2 questions. We'll talk about them, and then we'll end there today to make sure you guys are all on the same page.